and you criminalise the buyers, and almost all the buyers are men. And actually, maybe violence has been used in order to get them in. And we also know that the buyers, the men that go to buy, well, quite often they're able to see that the women that they're going to be buying sex from are trafficked. They know that they're trafficked, and yet they carry on with the transaction.
I can't help but even be distressed listening to Ash talking, because I know women and young girls who have been exploited in this way. Things like clean needles and substitute prescriptions are definitely needed at the start of people's journey.
What was the figure? You told me a figure, and I don't want to misquote you, but it frightened the life out of me when you told me how many beds are available in Glasgow, which is, for many metrics, it's the drugs capital of Europe. So, what was the number again for the whole of Glasgow?
There's actually only 23 rehab beds for the whole of Glasgow. Both of these legislative changes have common goals in that they want to protect the vulnerable, reduce harm and address the underlying issues, right?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the Scottish Parliament does suffer a little bit from an over interest in legislating, sometimes in areas where we don't probably, I think you're quite right, where we didn't need to do it. My view, also, I've been elected for 9 years now, is that political parties can make it really difficult to do the right thing.
For me, I think the whole independence thing is dead and buried with Alex Salmon.
Stop, Annemarie. Ash is a Scottish nationalist. I'm a mad unionist. We only want to go there, and you want to start an argument now in an empty house. Hi there, and welcome to the latest in the series of Craig Houston Talks To, and I've got two guests on this podcast. Both are trying to redefine Scotland and help Scotland by changing some very, very important laws. So we've got Ash Regan, who's an MSP, who's trying to change the prostitution laws in Scotland, and Annemarie Wards, who is a drugs charity CEO and is trying to change the way we deal with and treat and look after our people with addictions. So first and foremost, ladies, thanks very much for coming on and giving me some of your time, because I think it's important that people can hear about what you're doing. So thank you very much for that. So the first thing is, you've both got different laws that you want to change, but they are sort of connected. Now, do you want to just explain to me and the audience what the laws are you're wanting to change and why they need changing, please?
You go first, Ash. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think there is definitely crossover in how we deal with certain issues across Scotland, and I would say that there seems to me there's a bit of a linkage between the prostitution and also the drugs, in that Scotland has got itself into a position where, and I don't think that it's not through bad intent, but we are focusing, I believe, too much on what's called in the industry as harm reduction, rather than actually on root causes and things that would actually help to get people out of the situation that they're in that's maybe not good for them. But just to explain what I'm trying to do. So in about 25 years ago, in Sweden, they decided that they would make a bit of a stand, and they did this not as part of justice, but as a part of their equality law, that they would change the way that they had the laws arranged around prostitution. So they decided that for equality's sake, so this is for how all women are perceived in the society, they didn't think it was a very good idea that prostitution should be legal. So it's now called the Nordic model, and a number of countries across the world, I think it might be up to about 14 countries now around the world, have adopted this model. And it's got three main strands. So the first one is that you decriminalize the sellers. And for the most part, the vast majority of the sellers are women, although there are some men that also sell sex, but the vast majority of them are women. And you criminalize the buyers, and almost all the buyers are men. And then you add in a strong support mechanism as well. So that support, and we're sort of categorizing it as like a right to support. We're sort of trying to put it in those terms for people. And also that would be support for those who want to exit as well. So sort of three main strands. And the reason that we're doing that is that in Scotland, we have something called the Equally Safe strategy. So that was developed between the Scottish government, and it's also jointly developed and signed up to by COSLA, so part of the councils as well. And as part of that, it characterises prostitution as violence against women. So if you agree with that, and you think that prostitution is violence against women, then I think really you need to change the laws in Scotland to reflect the way that we conceptualize that now, and make the law kind of keep up with the way that we're looking at things now. And also, as well as being good for equality and good for the way that women are perceived across society, it also reduces the market of prostitution, and that in turn reduces trafficking inflows into the country. Yeah. So it has and it's well evidenced as well. There's lots of studies now that show that it has these impacts. So we believe it's a really good law to do. It's long past time that this should be done in Scotland now, I believe. It's come into the Parliament in various, slightly, not exactly the same form each time, but roughly the same. I think it's 3 or 4 times now it's come into the Scottish Parliament, the most recent of which was a Labour MSP called Rhoda Grant, and she couldn't get it past the stage where you have to get the cross-party support, because if you're doing a members' bill, you need to get 18 members from a number of different parties to support you in order to win the right to introduce it to the Parliament. And I managed to get that in 2 days, so that was really exciting, because I think it is really important, I think, especially in a minority parliament, to be able to work across party lines, work with people that you maybe don't agree with about everything, but on some things we do agree. And, so far it looks like we've got at least enough support to introduce the bill. And going on from that, we'll go through the normal stages, but I will need a simple majority of the people in the parliament in order to pass it into law.
Okay. So if this is successful, the byproduct of that and the result of that would be less prostitution. Is that the idea behind it?
Yes.
So
if you read, sorry, Craig.
No, you go.
Well, I was just going to say, if you read some of the accounts from women that have worked in prostitution, you can see that for many of them, a lot of people say, "Oh, well, it's a choice. That's their choice to go and do that." I think I would say, I've been trying to pursue this for about 10 years. I've been working on it for a really long time. I've met a lot of women that have, come through prostitution. They've exited. I've met some women that were trafficked into the UK. I've spoken to a lot of people, and honestly, the stories about what happens to these women and sometimes girls, and also the numbers of girls that get into prostitution underage, and also have been sexually abused before they go into this. It's quite horrific. So it links in quite well, I would say, with, I'm sure everybody saw the horrific, instances of the grooming gangs, or I'm calling them the rape torture gangs. But that model of grooming is really common way for pimps to get girls to go into prostitution. So I think that will maybe help the public understand a bit more about how it isn't, for a lot of people, it isn't really a choice that they've made freely, that it is very, very exploitative. It's very dangerous. It's one of the most dangerous things that you can do in countries where they've gone the other way and they've just made it basically a free-for-all. The number of women involved in prostitution that are murdered, the statistics are unbelievably shocking.
Yeah. So I think, is it safe to say, you're obviously far more versed on it than I am, but can you break prostitutes into 2 categories, ones who are forced into doing it and ones who it's a chosen profession? And if that is the case, what's the sort of split on that? Is the vast majority people who are forced into it, or is it a softer mix than that?
So, like I was just saying, there's very high numbers of people that get into this. I'm going to use girls who go in underage. So the first thing I would say is you're not making a choice. If you're starting to do this at 14, 15 years old, that is not something that, anybody would look at that and think that's a good idea. A lot of them have been abused as children. Some of them, I think about a third of them have been sexually abused as children. So you can understand that for them, this seems like a natural progression to them. But obviously we would look at that and say, they're traumatized. A lot of women that have been through prostitution, they're actually, when they look at them afterwards, they've got the same or worse levels of PTSD than war veterans. That's how horrific this can be for people. And then some women are forced into this through, poverty. They've got young children who don't see that they've got any other options. There is links to addiction. I'm sure Annemarie will be able to shed a little bit of light on that as well. Yeah. So we would probably say, from some of the data that we've got, that I know that people have watched various TV shows like Belle de Jour and, Diaries of a Call Girl and all that are presenting, I think, this quite glamorized impression of what it's like to do this job, if you can call it a job, which I think I would say I wouldn't call it a job. I would say the data supports that there's perhaps 1 or 2% of women that are working in prostitution that would maybe fit into that category of, you know, they would conceptualize it as their free choice to do it and so on. So that would leave us with a, you know, an extremely significant majority of women who are not there by a free choice, and would certainly, if they had any other options, would want to exit and go and do something else completely and never go back to it.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the key things is if you know, providing an alternative. You know, people still have families to pay. If they have addictions, then that's a whole different complex matter. But it's providing something at the end of it. It's not just there's a law and deal with the consequences as they come.
Yeah, so sorry, I've not explained this properly, because I was talking about, you know, that's ones maybe that are the people that are in Scotland, but then you've got another tranche of women and girls, and they're the ones that are trafficked. So perhaps they're from our main source countries at the moment are countries like Romania, Vietnam. Now, some of the girls that get involved in that will have been coerced, and actually maybe you know, the violence has been used in order to get them in. Some of them know what they're coming to do, but they don't know how bad it's going to be. And then when they're here, they're under the control of other people. So they are, you know, they're certainly not doing this as a choice they would want to make. And we also know that the buyers, the men that go to buy, will quite often they're able to see that the women that they're going to be buying sex from are trafficked. They know that they're trafficked, and yet they carry on with the transaction. So, you know, it's not good. It's a very, very exploitative situation.
No, certainly does. Now, Annemarie, you're the bill you're trying to get passed. Could you explain that and why we need your bill?
Sure. Thanks very much, Craig, and thanks, Ash, for that. I can't help but even be distressed listening to Ash talking, because I know women and, you know, young girls who have been exploited in this way, and particularly, you know, I think the percentages that Ash gave are, you know, certainly in my experience and what research I understand, you know, really, really strong. The majority of women are, you know, coerced into this behaviour, whether it be through another, you know, male pimp, for want of a better word, or an addiction, or both, in fact, you know. So there, you know, there's nobody's growing up and saying I want to be an addict, same as nobody grows up and says I want to be prostituted. So you know, the importance of Ash's bill is, and our bill as well, you know, the Right to Recovery bill, which is essentially, in layman's terms, a bill that would help people who are struggling with addiction get legal access to treatment and support. Now, you might think, well, don't need that, we've got addiction services. But actually in Scotland, we're so limited. Like Ash first started speaking about harm reduction, you know, like, which is, you know, the start of the spectrum of actual treatment. In fact, I would say that the majority of the so-called treatment that we have in Scotland are actually just harm reduction interventions. So these harm reduction interventions are things like, you know, clean needles. We saw recently the drug consumption rooms, substitute prescriptions, wound care, and these are all necessary and vital. Well, I don't know if the drug consumption room is vital and necessary, but, you know, things like clean needles and substitute prescriptions are definitely needed at the start of people's journey, if they don't have access to actual rehabilitation services. And one of the really common things about this topic of conversation is that when the general public hear the word treatment, they think rehab. But when the industry talks about treatment, or when politicians are talking about treatment, or even when the treatment industry is talking about treatment, they're not talking about rehab, they're talking about these harm reduction interventions. So the focus on harm reduction, so basically the same as Ash's bill, focusing on the symptoms rather than the cause, is what we seem to be, you know, caught up in Scotland. And the Right to Recovery bill would give people that legal access to the treatment of their choice, and it isn't necessarily just rehab. We've got a young woman that we're working with just now who's on a methadone script, has been for over 20 years, and she wants to change over to Buvidal, which is a much, well, in my opinion, and you know, anybody that knows their onions here will tell you, it's a much better drug. You're not sedated with it. It is a substitute prescription, but it's far more expensive than methadone. So we know that the alcohol and drug partnerships, they're paying an absolute fortune for it at the moment, because there's a patent on it, as there is with, you know, most medications. I think the patent's up for that drug in 2028, if I'm right, providing there isn't any other legislation comes in, which would make that drug a lot cheaper. But at the moment, it is a brilliant drug, and she cannot get access to it without, you know, she keeps asking her worker for it, and they keep fobbing her off. And it's the same, even we've got another client actually who's actually on Buvidal, who wants to lower her dose, and in order for her to lower her dose, she needs to see the prescriber. She's currently she's just seeing a drug worker, so she needs to get access to a prescriber, and she's not getting that. She keeps requesting it, and she can't get to actually talk to somebody who can lower her dose. So, you know, the general public thinks a lot of the time, you know, about, you know, people are making a choice to be an addict or a choice to be you know, to be prostituted. And actually, when you dig a wee bit under the surface, there's actually a lot more going on in the system that's supposed to be helping people get exit routes from being prostituted or from addiction. Really don't exist in the same way that facilitating harm does. You know, we've just saw, and I'll finish on this, we just saw the drug consumption room open, and over the last couple of weeks, we've seen that a total of 60 people have used it, and that works out on average a cost of £1,400 per week per visit, per individual. Now, rehab only costs £1,000 a week, but we're paying £1,400 a week, taxpayers' money, to give people somewhere safe to use drugs. And, you know, in an ideal world, it wouldn't be an either-or situation. We would have both, but currently in Scotland, the majority of the funding is going into these harm reduction interventions that aren't actually treatment, and that's why we need a bill to give people the legal right.
The right, yeah. So unlike Ash's bill, which is trying to change a law, that's how we have interpreted that. Yours is trying to bring something new to the table, but more to try and help people. Because I must admit, I was one of those people before I started talking to yourself, Annemarie, that when people spoke about rehabilitation, I always thought meant they're going to rehab. And just imagined that if you were an addict that wanted help and rehab was the best solution for you, then you would be provided. But what was the figure? You told me a figure, and I don't want to misquote you, but it frightened the life out of me when you told me how many beds are available in Glasgow, which is, for many metrics, it's the drugs capital of Europe. So what was the number again for the whole of Glasgow?
There's actually only 23 rehab beds for the whole of Glasgow, 17 in Rainbow House and 7 in Phoenix House. And Glasgow doesn't refer, as far as we know, it doesn't refer outside. Now, the figures are quite staggering, because in Glasgow, Greater Glasgow and Clyde's demographic report from 2023, they said that they had 18,060 problem drug users and 132,955 problematic alcohol users in the Greater Glasgow and Clyde area. Now, that's from their own report. So that's 132 plus 18,000. That's 150,000 people who have only got access to 23 rehab beds. That means that if you're in addiction, now, most of those people will only be like in complete crisis, you know. In fact, probably quite a substantial amount of them will be functioning to some level or another, but they're still, you know, health-wise and emotionally and spiritually, physically, they're in trouble. And I would say probably, you know, at least just going on worldwide averages, you know, if you're in problematic behaviour around substances, the chances of you getting out of that on your own are like less than
0.
Aye. Do you know what I mean? So you've got all those thousands and thousands of people and so little actual help. And to me, it's a bit like Ash's bill. Like, if you don't actually, genuinely empower people to, take responsibility and, give them a chance to actually go on with their own lives, what does that mean for the rest of the community? Do you know what I mean? It means that we actually become damaging to our community, and everybody knows that about addiction. Do you know what I mean? Everybody can see that with their own eyes. But if you talk about the implications of, for instance, the behaviour, like most addicts will really lower their own moral standards. So they will lie, they will cheat, they will steal. These are just actual facts that people in recovery talk about. But if you're seen to be talking about that stuff, then you're accused of stigmatising drug users. Right? There is a shame attached to using drugs that we've normalised, but we've took that away because of we're putting in these services that do actually normalise. It tells the community it's normal now that people take drugs, so we just need to get used to it. And I think there's a case to be argued for us to reinstall some of that stigma and reinstall some of that shame.
To be fair, as someone detached from the issue, I mean, I do know people, unfortunately, that are close to it have lost their life through addictions. But you're obviously far more involved than me. And it seems to me, my uneducated wisdom, that in Scotland just now, we either let people take what we used to do up until last week was we would just give people different drugs to the ones that were on, and they're still got an addiction, they're just addiction to a different product. And now we're allowing them in a place in Glasgow to take illegal Class A drugs in a safe place, which I understand the theory behind that, but that's kind of what we're doing. We're not taking people off them. We're just giving them more or giving them different ones. And that seems to me a bit bizarre. But
see, just see on the point about shame and stigma, just so as I can clarify it. Like, most addicts, when they get well, like when they start the recovery journey, it is those emotions of shame, of guilt, of remorse. Those are things that lead us to our rock bottoms. And if we are normalising drug use to the point where we're co-signing it, enabling it, what does that tell us? What does that tell us as a society? And there's no anybody in recovery that I know that hasn't, displayed like extreme regret and made amends for their behaviour. Do you know what I mean? And the behaviour is driven by the obsession and compulsion for the drug. And as soon as you get treatment for that and you get freedom from that, those behaviours completely disappear. And in most cases, they just go because you're not driven in that way anymore. So I think there is, and it's the same with prostitution to a certain extent. The conversation is always about women making choices to sell sex, when actually, we should be talking about why men are buying sex and why it's became a commodity, and it's a bigger commodity now than it's ever been. If you think about OnlyFans.
Yeah. So, I get what you're trying to achieve with your bill, and understand it's a new one, so it's just, it's not replacing anything. But on yours, Ash, the current situation is what? What is the current law? And I know what you want it to be. You want it to be the man could be criminalised, but the women, and I'm using that because 90%, 99% are probably that way around.
Yeah.
So, am I right in saying that that's what you're trying to achieve? There would be a decriminalisation for the person selling the sex, but the person buying the sex. So where is the law just now?
Yeah, I just want to pick up just briefly on what Annemarie was talking about the shame, because I think there is an element of that here. So we're actually saying with this bill, we want to reframe the shame. So, and put, I think, the shame where it belongs onto the buyer, for exactly the reason that Annemarie was talking about, because it is creating so many societal problems, and it is certainly not a victimless act it has so much harm, both for the person that's being bought, I believe the person that's doing the buying, but also society as a whole as well. So just to make that point. But yeah, there are existing laws around prostitution. So probably many of us might remember when prostitution was a bit more visible because it was on street. And now I believe that there are still places in Scotland where you will see on street prostitution, but it's less than it used to be, because what's happened over the last few years, I guess as well with the rise of the internet, is that many of the prostituted women will be in flats, they'll be indoors, they're off the street, and potentially, nobody's really seeing that in the same way. So there are laws on curb crawling. So that, but there's very few convictions on that when you look at the data.
Yeah.
And then there are laws on soliciting. So that's on, both buying and selling sex outside, and also on brothel keeping. But I would say, and I have had conversations with the police around this, because obviously I represent Edinburgh, and Edinburgh is known for having what we call in Edinburgh as saunas, but obviously they're really brothels. And, despite the fact there was some, high profile raids a few years back, but as far as I'm concerned, there are existing laws to prosecute for brothel keeping, but I'm not sure that, that's perhaps being used as effectively as it could be. So yes, there are some laws, but I'm seeking to change them around. And also, for women that have received convictions, this is quite a key point as well that was brought to me by women who had come through prostitution, exited, and wanted to go on to do other things, to work in other jobs, where having a previous conviction was obviously harming their chances. It's making it very difficult for them to leave that behind and go and do something else, because it was coming up every time they're applying for jobs and so on.
Yeah.
So I want to also repeal any previous convictions that women have for any prostitution offences, because I think it's so important. If people want to leave that and they want to exit and they want to go on and do a different job, they shouldn't be held back by that, especially, as I would say, that really we are, and I think there was an example of this in the rape torture gangs that I was talking about right at the start, where basically children have been groomed into, the sex trade, right? They're then being exploited, damaged to the point they're probably going to come out with PTSD and goodness knows what else. And then they're being criminalized for their own abuse. I mean, it's a disgrace. We should not be doing that in a civilized society. So I think this law is long overdue to be changed. I really hope the rest of Parliament will get behind me and we can pass this into law.
Absolutely. Craig, could I just say, your question, why change both laws? Well, both of these legislative changes share a common goal, right? And if you think about it, culturally, I think Scotland's been caught up in the blame game for a very long time, right? Pointing the finger at various places for our own troubles. And I think that's become a part of a sort of cultural malaise that we have, right? But that's another conversation. But both of these legislative changes have common goals in that they want to protect the vulnerable, reduce harm and address the underlying issues, right? So for addiction recovery, it's about ensuring that everybody's got access to the care that they need without delay or stigma. But for the prostitution bill, or sorry, the unbuyable bill, it's about shifting the focus from criminalising vulnerable people to targeting the demand for sexual exploitation, while ensuring that those who are involved in prostitution can exit it safely with support. So in both cases, the intention is actually to create a more just and supportive society where individuals are actually empowered to improve their lives, and the focus is on reducing harm rather than just punishing people who are already vulnerable. And I think that's about putting power, agency and responsibility back into individuals' hands. So it's actually both of them are laws that would really help Scotland.
Yeah. No, I think I'm going to play devil's advocate here. Okay, my opinion is formulating just now as I'm talking to you, Ash, which was one of the main reasons for doing this. If you remember how that started, Annemarie, and I need to thank you for it. You and I were discussing your thing, and then I said to you, what's this thing Ash Regan's doing? Because I wanted to learn more about it, and that's how this whole podcast came about. So I'm going to play the devil's advocate here. I've seen two laws in Scotland which we changed, and we introduced new ones, and they didn't actually need them. And I've had personal experience through both of them. The first one is I'm a football fan, and we had the Offensive Behaviour at Football Act. Now, I said in day one, I was working for a professional football club at the time, and my job was quite closely tied to the police. And I said, what could you do in the street or at a football match today and get arrested that you couldn't have been arrested for yesterday? Because the laws were already there. We just kind of reworded them. So we changed laws, in my opinion, on the Offensive Football Act for no difference. There was not more criminals or less criminals. Nothing changed. Just a wording on a piece of paper. And I feel the Hate Crime Act was the very, very same. I stood outside Holyrood and gave a speech on the 1st April, the day that was announced, because again, I just don't see the benefit in it. I don't think anybody should be hateful. I think that's a human trait that we should embrace, that we don't show hate. But actually the criminalisation part of it wasn't making any difference. And it seems to have been that. I spent time, I've done a podcast with one of the country's top KCs about the hate crime, Thomas Ross, and we spoke, and he more learned than me, agreed with me. So, and I'm not suggesting there is. I mean, Annemarie's is quite different because there's nothing there it's replacing. But with the prostitution bill, is there any chance that there's laws there that we could be or could we maybe bring this bill in and utilise laws better that are already there, Ash? So what's your opinion? How would you kick back on that? Because I'm not saying that that's my opinion. My opinion, this seems to make sense. I like to apply common sense and logic. Yeah. And if you can bring something in that will benefit the majority of people then and not affect everybody else, then why wouldn't you? So is there things there just now?
Yeah, I agree with you that I think the Scottish Parliament does suffer a little bit from an over interest in legislating, sometimes in areas where we don't probably, I think you're quite right, where we didn't need to do it. I think I made that point when I was going for First Minister a couple of years ago, that there's a lot of legislation that the Scottish Government were trying to put through, some of which gladly, I'm glad to see that they've now dropped, that they just didn't need to be doing. They hadn't been thought through properly. And I think there is a bit of that sometimes with the government. They think, oh, I've got a problem here, so we'll just change the law. That they try to rush it through, because actually developing legislation takes a really long time. It's not really something you can just do in a few months. So yeah, I definitely agree with you. There has been a bit of that. In the case of this bill, no, because as I was explaining, because most of the prostitution, not all of it, but a lot of it has the way that prostitution is done now in really everywhere. This is not just specific to Scotland, is that it's very much moved indoors. And so we think maybe about 70% or maybe more of it is now taking place in an indoor setting, whereas obviously it used to mainly be on the street where it was more visible. So that means that the curb crawling laws, etc., would not be useful in that context. And also, but I know I'm about to sort of contradict myself in a way, but I sometimes think that you need legislation, and part of the function of legislation is to create a cultural shift. So I'm not wanting to change this law because I want to put loads of men in prison. That's not what I'm trying to achieve here. What I'm trying to achieve here is to change the culture so that we go from a society that thinks that it's perfectly, or some people think, let's get this right, that it's perfectly acceptable to go and buy a woman for sex, even though, she might be trafficked, she might be, there against her will, and this is not going to be good for her or for you, that you think that's acceptable, to a society where it is not socially acceptable to pay for sex. Because that's what we've seen in Sweden. That's how it's changed there. And I think it would be better for everyone. So no, I think in this case, and you're quite right to say it's not always the case, but in this case, you do need to change this law in order to have the effects that I'm trying to achieve for the people that are caught up in this exploitation, but also the benefits across society as a whole.
Yeah, I think like anything, and you are two sensible ladies, girls, females, I don't know how to term people these days, so please do forgive me from fear of ending up in jail.
I'll
take them all. The sensible bit done you, Annemarie, didn't it? For doing these things, and especially what you said earlier, Ash, triggered a thought with me. You came up with this idea, but you developed it through listening to others. And I think the biggest, and I might be wrong, but just listening, one of the biggest benefits of this would be the thing that you took on board by listening to people, and that was that you would not have it on your record if you went in the past. I think that's a very, very clever part of the bill, to be honest with you, that I hadn't picked up when I did read it myself. So that to me is phenomenal. And the other thing that I knew about you before you came on was you were at one point an SNP minister. Yes. And you stepped down from that position. And if my memory serves me right, that was because of principles on something that they were trying to change in law, and that was the gender recognition, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, hat off to you for that. There's a lot of your politics I don't, no, that's not even true. Maybe one thing your politics I don't agree with, but we'll maybe chat about that at a later date. But no, it's hat off you for that, for listening to people and for having the morals and giving up. I think a lot of people in politics, it's an occupation for them. And anybody giving up an occupation that gives you a reduction in salary, there's not a lot of people would do that. And maybe even people with phone bills and stuff like that should take these things on board. So well done for that. So I think, so I covered the stuff that I wanted to, I wanted to do this because I wanted to know more about the bill, who it was going to affect, what the potential positives were going to be. Annemarie's I obviously knew a wee bit more about because I've spoken to Annemarie about it in the past, but again, great insight with Annemarie with the figures and stuff like that. So I can't thank you enough for coming on and having a chat, because it certainly has helped me. We'll put it out and hopefully anybody that wasn't aware of the bill or wanted to know more about it. So what's the chronological order of things just now, Ash? Where are you up to just now, and where do we go? And then the same to Annemarie.
Yeah, I think Annemarie's a little bit further ahead than I am. So I did my consultation over the summer period last year. And then the other thing I should explain is that normally when you're doing, so there's obviously a couple of different types of bills. You can have a government bill. So obviously you've got the whole support of all the government officials and the government department behind you. Then you've got something in the Scottish Parliament we call a members' bill. And normally you would get support from what we call the non-government bills unit, the NGBU. Now, unfortunately, when I went to speak to them, they were at total capacity and they weren't able to help me. So as a result of that, we've been doing all of that myself, just with me and my very small team. So like my researcher who works 3 days a week, she's just been working full time on this. So it's been a huge amount of work for a very small team. We had to then look at all the responses that we got. So we got 100 responses, and we went for quality over quantity because we knew we'd be processing them ourselves. And then we've just published all the responses so people can go and have a look at them if they want to see what various organisations across Scotland were saying, and what's called the summary document. So that's us writing about all the responses we've had and putting different people's viewpoints. So that report is also available online. You can go to the Parliament website for anybody that wants to go and have a look at that, and you can have a read through. It's quite long. I think it's about 90 pages, but it's very comprehensive, and it very much sets out the arguments that we are making, but also brings in, arguments people opposing have brought forward, and people can have a look and see how they feel about that. Obviously, then you have to get the cross-party support, which I've done. So I formally reached that threshold. And that means that I now have what's called the right to introduce the bill. So we've just got the bill drafted up, and we're just kind of finalising that. And there's a few little more technical hurdles that we have to go through with the Parliament, and then it will be introduced, and then it goes through the 3 stages. So the problem is I'm not in control of when the stages happen or what committee it goes to or anything like that. The Parliament handles all that. So we just introduce it, and then it should make its way through the Parliament. So I've probably got about another year ahead of me on this.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, right. Okay. So that was going to my next question was that's good. That's a lot shorter than what I thought, because obviously, regardless of what happens between now and then, we will have an election in May 2026 for Holyrood, and I would imagine you're standing. And if that was unsuccessful, or if anybody passing a bill was unsuccessful and they weren't going to be in the Parliament, what happens to it?
You have to finish it. You have to finish. If you don't finish it before the end of the session, you're done. So wow. I have to finish it. So I've got just over a year, which should be enough time, hopefully. So yeah, I'm determined to try to push it through.
Is that regardless of whether you get voted back in again? Is it the actual Parliament 5 years that you have to get it through?
Yeah, it's the Parliament sitting, so I would have to finish it. And obviously, at this point, I would have no idea about whether the public will want to have me back. So you can't take that for granted. So yeah, no, it's got to be finished before May 2026.
That seems mightily unfair, because even if you were, put back in another election, your chances stopped. You need to basically start again. That seems absolutely.
Yeah, you wouldn't have to go back to the beginning. So you could skip through the consultation stage, because also you would have just done that. If you'd have done that quite recently, they would be okay with that. But yeah, you'd have to go through again. But yeah, it is a bit of a weird system, having to be completed within the parliamentary session.
Yeah, and Annemarie, how long do you think yours that would take for yours to get through? Is it the same? It must be the same then. It must be you have to get through before May 26, or it's back a few steps in.
Exactly. So, like Ash was saying, we're a wee bit ahead. So we're at the kind of stage 2 bit where it's detailed consideration. So it's going to the Health and Safety and Sport Committee. Is that what they call it? And it'll be considered. So we've passed the stage that Ash's bill has at, and we've now collated all the evidence that's came back from the detailed evidence that's came back. I actually did a run through the evidence over the last couple of days that's came back, and I reckon, although I'll be interested to hear what the Bills team says, just from my reading of it, it's about 80% supportive. So if, and I suspect, the committee will try to kill this bill. I don't trust the Scottish Parliament 1 inch with this at all.
Controversial.
Well, it's my truth, as they say. At every stage, I've felt like they've tried to kill this bill. Like, I don't need to get into that maybe another time, but I'll probably write about it. But the really good thing about this is what Ash said there, about, there's other people trying to bring her bill or variations of her bill through. And what's actually happening through the process here is that the public are getting to understand not just the sort of stages that a bill would go through or why legislation can really impact culture, and the culture change aspect is really important of what, so even if my bill fails, it's been a win-win because the press have been involved in it, the media has been involved in it, the public's been involved in it, all the different conversations that have been had have it, and people have the awareness. So even if this version of my bill or Ash's bill fails, there's an opportunity for it to go forward with somebody else, because we looked at previous bills around this stuff before we put this forward, and we thought, right, we tried to ascertain where they failed and why they failed, so we brought a better bill this time, and so it's all progress. It's very slow progress, and I would like the culture change and the law to change much quicker, because obviously people are dying, so, but it's a win already for us. But technically there's another stage to go. If we get through the next stage, which I'm hoping will be done and dusted by Easter, but it might not be. It'll depend on how busy that committee is. And it goes to stage 3. Well, there is actually, another final stage after that, stage 4 and stage 5, which is royal assent. But, all this stuff is really good for educating, anybody that's interested in trying to change Scotland or trying to make Scotland better. This is one of the ways that you can do it, and I completely agree with some of the world leading, spelt WRLD, world leading parliament, and more often than not I've been affronted with some of the stuff that they've tried to put through, but these two bills are worthy. They are genuinely world leading. Particularly the right to recovery bill is definitely world leading. No piece of legislation like this has ever been attempted before, and the reason why it's been attempted is because our treatment system is so unresponsive to the actual people's needs.
No, I think I couldn't agree with you more, because I, for one, there's two things I've learnt from these bills, and the frightening figure about the amount of beds available to the place. It's the worst place in Europe for drug addiction. That's ridiculous. And then there's an appreciation now that if I was to put a figure on it before of how many of prostitutes are what were probably street prostitutes previously and just doing that in a house now, or the high-end ones that we glamorise in the TV, I would have probably put it at not 50-50, certainly not 99-100, probably somewhere 70-30, but that's wrong. So these two actions by these two ladies, if they fail, because you're right, they're still putting the perceptions and people learning, so hat off to both of you. There's something else about it that I quite like. I think a devolved parliament in Scotland, because it's been run by the SNP for 18 years, has let down both polar sides of the Constitution argument. It's let down the country for the Unionists, and it's blown the independent streams of nationalists, in my eyes. So both sides are like, we've had enough. And what we've had for 18 years is a building that's not operated to its full potential. And what I'd like to see in the future is people doing what yous are doing. And that's taking the book of devolved powers and wringing it dry and not using those powers, actually abusing those powers, and take everything we can from those powers. And then we'll have a better Scotland regardless of whether you're a unionist or a nationalist, or the big chunk in the middle that everybody forgets about, and the people that are just generally not that bothered either way, that we just don't actually think of. So use us doing what I hope the next parliament do, and hopefully we don't have an SNP parliament. It'll probably be a coalition. But just, we don't talk about the stuff that we can't fix. As you'll know fine well, Annemarie, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the strength to change the ones I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And we spend 5-year blocks of just sitting and talking about stuff that we can't change. So at least this is a start. You know, you two are both using the devolved power, the book of devolved powers, and giving it a wee ring to say what benefit can we get out of this. And hopefully people sort of caught on to that idea. And once we get past May 26, hopefully we can have a whole government and even a whole parliament, regardless of the colour of somebody's rosette. If we get the majority of people in that building that want to do the same thing, we'll have a better Scotland. And things like that.
Couldn't echo that any clearer. Like, you know, those who voted for independence and those who voted to remain in the Union both have valid concerns and aspirations for Scotland's future. And that healing, and I do think we need to move on, do you know what I mean? That healing involves recognising that, you know, all the perspectives that we all have in building solutions that can accommodate the whole of Scotland is where we need to go now. Like, we have to rebuild trust. We have to focus on Scotland's prosperity. We have to be promoting compassion and respect in every way we can, because the division has paralysed us and it needs to end, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of that in politics, and not just on the constitutional side, but you know, we saw it with the passage of the Gender Recognition Reform Bill. We're seeing it just now with regard to people like Trump, that anybody that a lot of people don't agree with, they're just dismissing them. They're labeling them as fascists and bigots and all this. We have to get past that, and we have to be able to talk to people that we don't always agree with, because you're maybe not going to agree with on some things, but you will have common ground in other areas. And I mean, I said this a lot 2 years ago. I was very critical of the majority government, the coalition between the SNP and the Green Party, and I was in that government. And I knew that there was this sense that once you have a majority, you can really do what you want as a government. You don't have to convince anybody. You don't have to take anybody with you. You just steamroller through whatever you want. And to my mind, that's not what the parliament really was set up for. It was meant to be a parliament of minorities. It was meant to be more on that European, that's, you know, the way some of the other European countries where they've got lots of parties, they're all small, and then you kind of work across you know, different parties to get things done. So my view would be minority government's better. It means the government has to listen to the public, it has to listen to the parliament, and it has to come to what I would say is better solutions, both for legislation, but also for other things like the budget and so on, because they have to appeal to a wider set of concerns.
No, I kind of agree with that. And I know we're moving on to other things, the reasons that maybe we could catch up another time about that other conversation, Ash, but my hopes and aspirations are we get a building in May 2026 that, regardless of people's colour or the rosette, they can go to their work every day for 5 years and say we're going to do what's best for Scotland. We're going to leave the stuff that we can't discuss at the door, right? Because what's the point in taking it into the hall? And if we do that, in 5 years, we could probably make a big difference and rectify a lot of the ills that's been done over. We've polarised our country. And we've done it back in round about 2012 when we started discussing the referendum up into 2014. And we made people, I genuinely don't believe the unionists or the separatists, excuse my language, and the reason I've started using that word, I view myself as a nationalist. I just see my nation as the UK. So I am a nationalist. So to describe someone that wants Scotland to be independent, it kind of conflicts in my head. And I don't believe there's a majority of unionists or Scottish nationalists in our society. There's a big chunk in the middle. They get forgotten about. But we made people in 2014 become a unionist or a Scottish nationalist because they had to, because there was only two options on the ballot paper. Scotland got ripped apart at that point. I've seen it from my own eyes with family. I've got a family that some of them are activists in the Yes campaign. And you know, it caused conflict, and some conflicts that are still not healed. People you worked with, people you had relationships, people in families. And we've never recovered from that, in my opinion. But we need to. And I think having a minority or a coalition going in 2025, as long as the majority of people in there, I don't care about the result, as long as they go to their work in the morning and remind themselves that they're there to serve the people, not the other way about. And
I think most of them do think that. I would say my view, obviously, I've been elected for 9 years now, is that political parties can make it really difficult to do the right thing. So I'm a very rare example of somebody that put the country before their political party, and there was
to be
cost.
perfectly honest, I
Very
think it's
heavy
even
price to pay for that, right?
Well, I was going to say that to respect to you, I think you actually put your political career at risk at that point.
Yeah, I did. I knew what I was doing. Obviously, I thought it through carefully before, but I knew that is what would happen. That the likelihood was that my political party, which at the time was the SNP, would never trust me again, and I would not be put forward for my seat again. I would be what we call deselected. But I would say that's not specific to the SNP. Very similar things go on in the Labour Party, the Conservatives, and so on. So I think that the party system has its downsides. I mean, I can't think of another way to do it, because I'm not sure the public is at this point ready to engage with looking up 128 different people to see what their views are on things. I think most people are not that interested in it. So it's easier just to pick a party. But it is very challenging. And I think there's more people. I think a lot of people that are in politics, not all of them, but some of them, they're more concerned about their careers. And I mean, I guess we can all understand that. Everybody's got mortgages to pay and kids and all the rest of it. But I think that maybe we need to reconceptualize politics as not being so much about careers, and maybe being more about people who go in to do something specific. People that want to go in because they want to change the law on, the drugs.
What about the radical notion that MSPs, MPs are there to, serve and to bring their constituents' voices, for their constituents' voices to be heard? Like, for me, you could solve it by allowing people to vote with their conscience, regardless of their party. Do you know what I mean? Like, if people were to vote with their conscience and also to vote with what their constituents wanted, we would have a very different democracy.
Yeah, I said I shared that comment with Neil Hanvey. I'd arranged to interview Neil. I'd met him, spoke to him a couple of times, and I met him at a function, and I just found him quite interesting. I thought I wanted to talk to him in a podcast. And then the election was pulled. Remember, with the snap election? So he was caught in a bit where he kind of couldn't talk about a lot of stuff because there's rules around when it's election period. And he had to, it was quite funny because I met him in his parliamentary office, and he had to move banners and stuff because even having an Alba logo at the back wasn't allowed. Crazy things. So anyway, and what I was saying to him at the time was, if people voted for people, and what we're meant to be doing is selecting someone from our constituency to go down to Westminster, in this case, and represent us. And if people done that, they would look at what Neil had achieved in the last few years or not. They would judge him on that and say, I've done all right, we'll have Neil. They don't. The biggest barometer you need to check to what I'm saying is correct. People were voting for the result. Or, they don't stop listening to the people, and they actually just, it's the rosette on their shoulder that they're buying into. Well, listen, ladies.
Neil is a sterling politician, absolutely and genuinely driven by his conscience as well. So there's a great mould there. It's just, for me, I think the whole independence thing is dead and buried with Alex Salmond.
Stop, Annemarie. Ash is a Scottish nationalist. I'm a mad unionist. We only want to go there. And you want to start an argument now in an empty house?
Well, I'm just putting my truth forward, and I think it's time to move on. It's time to heal. We need to. Our government's our country's a bloody state.
I was invited to do a podcast as a guest, and the guy said to me, "I take it you would want to kill the notion of Scottish independence," and I said, "Well, no, because if that's how we deal with things in society, and we just kill off things that folk have got a different opinion from me, I'm not sure where you stop." So actually, having that notion and having a desire to have us independent Scotland is fine. I don't have a problem with people having that opinion. But when you've got a government, and that's all they want to do, as you touched on it before, we want to blame Westminster. and we want to blame Tory and we want to blame Labour. It's not healthy.
Yeah,
And,
it has a really bad culture.
There is room for discussion for it, but when it drives every bloody thing and every bit of PR and every bit of paperwork you put out, it has affected the country in 18 months.
It's totally distorted our growth in every area. It's been so bad, and it's got increasingly worse in the last, well, to my mind, at least the last 5 or 6 years. And I do think that even if we had a moratorium on it for the next couple of elections, you know, because the country's in such a mess, we've got a housing crisis, we've got a drug crisis, you know, like we've got a cost of living crisis, like we're too many crises. Like, can we just press pause on all this until we're sorted? Migration crisis, refugee crisis, you name it, you know?
Yeah. Well, look, unless you ladies, women, have got anything to add, all I need to say is, look, thanks very much for both your time. It's been well appreciated, the time you've put into the podcast, but also the knowledge and information you've given me. So all it leaves me to say is thank you very much to both of you, and good luck with both your bills, and hopefully it'll make a better Scotland.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Right back at you, Craig, because you've shown a level of open-mindedness there as well, so thank you. As a
Me with an open mind? No, Annemarie, you don't read my Twitter feed, I'm a bigot. I've got a closed mind.
I know, we're all right-wing bigots now, Craig. You're in good company.
Aye. All right, so thanks very much, and speak to you all again soon. Have a great weekend.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Have a great day. Cheerio, bye now.